Welcome to MedHeads, the weekly show that brings a biopsychosocial focus to issues of the day, along with special guests who will showcase their expertise and enthusiasm about their field of practice. Your host, Dr. Fergal Armstrong.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong and welcome to MedHeads. Today we have regular guest Marty Kendall with us. Marty, how are you?
Awesome, great to be here with you again, Fergal.
Yeah, great to see you again. So listen, I wanted today to talk about data-driven fasting, and you've got a website on data-driven fasting, and we'll put that link below. But before we leap into that fascinating subject, let's talk a little bit around it first of all. So the thermic effect of food. What is the thermic effect of food?
Thermic effect of food is just the energy that's lost in the conversion of the food you eat to ATP, which is your energy currency of the body that you use in your mitochondria to fuel your body and move yourself around. So in that conversion through the digestion and the conversion and the breaking down of your amino acids and carbohydrates and alcohol and fat, they have certain different losses. It's more difficult to convert protein to energy, whereas carbs and fat are easy to convert. So you get about 9% loss from carbohydrate on average, 4% from fat, like 20 to 35% losses from protein. So protein's harder to convert and not a great source of energy for day-to-day use, but really handy for building your muscles and repairing your organs and making neurotransmitters and the like. So yeah.
All right. So if I can use a financial analogy, you've got to invest to actually recoup. So there's a cost to digestion of food. Yep. And then when you factor that cost
the brokerage or the transaction costs of the food.
Yes, the transaction costs of food, yeah. So that means then that there are some foods which actually don't produce energy because they cost too much to digest. I mean, I heard that celery was actually a negative food because there's so much fiber in it. It actually costs so much energy to actually digest it that the return you get on it is less than the cost. Are there any other foods that are a bit like celery, as far as you know?
Things like mushroom and those sorts of really bulky, fibrous, water-filled foods that are very light, have very few calories, and take a lot of energy to digest, but don't actually yield a lot of energy. So lettuce or those sorts of things that are incredibly, they provide nutrients and take energy to digest, but don't give you a lot of calories in return to power your body.
Right. If only we could love celery and lettuce in the same way that we love beer and chips and chocolate.
Yeah. And there's something to that. Your body just goes, it doesn't want to starve. So it goes for those energy dense foods that, like we talked about last time, give you carbs and fat at the same time without too much protein and quickly convert into energy that you can store as fat.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? So moving on to metabolism, I mean, weight loss, the science of weight loss started out, didn't it, with basically calories in versus calories out, and calories out was basically a function of metabolism, wasn't it? What factors do you know that influence metabolism? I mean, how do we actually change the calories out bit?
Yeah, it's incredibly complex, and people say, just eat less and move more to lose weight. But the factors on both sides of that calories in, calories out equation are just incredibly complex and beyond our ability to track with a fitness tracker or Fitbit or chronometer on MyFitnessPal, because they're really complex, because on the calories outside, as we eat less, our body adapts. We burn less energy. When we've got pandemics, we move around less, and we can't. Our non-exercise activity thermogenesis decreases. Another thermogenesis word. And
what is that?
I suppose we quickly adapt to a lower calorie intake.
What is non-activity thermogenesis?
Yeah, so I suppose it's when when you're not exercising, when you're not intentionally running around or trying to burn off calories, when you have a donut or a whole lot of energy or a massive meal, they're fidgeting. You see your kids fidgeting like anything and moving around and twitching and like I'm doing right now. And it's that energy you burn off just through the day with your general movement. And as you cut your calories, you tend to move less, you become more sluggish, and you'll just sit on the couch and watch TV, and you're not very energetic, and you don't exude a lot of heat, and all those sorts of things sort of shut down. So your body's incredibly complex and fascinating, and it's really hard to measure it the way we would in a bomb calorimeter, which is where you burn the food and see that 1 gram of water. That amount of food raises 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius, which is a calorie. So we don't really burn food the way that a bomb calorimeter does.
Yeah, that's true enough. I remember doing those in science when I was a kid.
Wow.
So one of the things that I think of when I'm thinking about the burning energy when we're not moving is something that we call the basal metabolic rate, and that really one of the markers of the basal metabolic rate is actually body temperature. So your resting body temperature is a good marker for that, and I always think of 36.5 degrees Celsius as a temperature that one should aspire to. Because some writers suggest that a temperature less than 36.5 is actually indicative of a lower than optimal, I won't say lower than normal, but a lower than optimal basal metabolic rate. And I don't say lower than normal because the normal body temperature range is actually 35 to 37. So, fever is defined as more than 37, and hypothermia is defined as less than 35. But within that range, I mean, you've alluded to the fact that there are so many factors which can change your metabolic rate. And I'm thinking of disease states, because being a doctor, that's what I do. So for instance, a very very obvious one to me would be thyroid diseases. So your thyroid gland is a gland that is found in the neck, and it's really acting as the thermostat for the body's furnace. And if you're underactive on your thyroid gland, then you're very sluggish, you're very slow, and you've got less heat, you've got less energy, and your temperature goes down a little bit. So that would influence metabolism. But are there any other factors that you can identify that will influence metabolism?
Yeah, I think muscle mass is a major one. That if you've got plenty of muscle mass, your those basal metabolic rate calculators are all based around how much muscle mass you're carrying. So in weight loss, it's critical that you maintain your lean muscle mass, so you maintain your metabolic rate, so you don't have to cut calories really, really, really low to maintain a lower weight, and you also look better. But also it depends on what you eat. Like if you drink, a cup of vodka, you'll exude a whole lot more heat and get sweats. And similarly with protein, because alcohol has to be burnt off really quickly because there's nowhere to store it. But protein has a very high thermic effect. So if you eat a whole lot of meats, they call it the meat sweats. If you eat a whole lot of protein all at once in one big batch, you'll exude all this heat as you try to convert that to energy, and your body says, I can't deal with all this protein, it's too hard to convert to ATP, so I'm going to exude it as heat and even dump some of it off into the urine. So the calorie is not a calorie the same way that you would burn in a bomb calorimeter.
So that's a very interesting point that you've made, is that muscle mass and muscle activity are actually big factors that influence metabolism. So, I mean, I'm particularly an advocate of high intensity interval training, and the idea of that is, of course, that you stimulate your muscles and you exercise as intensely as you can for a limited amount of time in a day, and that then actually stimulates your basal metabolic rate overnight. So actually your higher basal metabolic rate overnight burns more calories when you're asleep. Because the thing is, if you're ice skating, if you're walking, basically you can walk for an hour and burn 200 calories and then go and eat a cream bun, and that's it. You're back to neutral again. Whereas if you can do if you can do something for 5-10 minutes max, which then stimulates your basal metabolic rate all through the day and overnight, well, then you're constantly making those gains, those incremental gains in terms of losing energy and losing fat. So,
Definitely.
which then brings us on to the point of, well, what's counting calories then? What's the point of that?
Yeah, no, definitely. Given it's so complex, counting calories is fraught with frustration and confusion, and a lot of people put all this effort into tracking calories on their app and MyFitnessPal, and your lizard brain always tries to work out how to get that extra cream bun that you don't log, or you don't weigh the extra scoop of peanut butter that was still on the spoon that you put in your mouth, or for all this effort you put into it, a lot of the time it doesn't yield great results because so many different factors, so many moving parts, and your little subconscious always works to make sure you stay alive and have enough energy, and tricks your conscious brain into to eating a little bit more than you want. And a lot of people, as I mentioned in the data-driven fasting article, a lot of people literally go insane and have eating disorders and neurosis from long-term calorie tracking, just because it's such a mentally intensive activity that fights against your instinctual drives and impulses. So it sets up your conscious against your subconscious, and your subconscious always wins, and your conscious brain ends up getting depressed and sad and not happy when it loses.
So this is particularly a problem that you've said in your website with MyFitnessPal, that there's a correlation between that and there's these feelings of anxiety, etc.
Yeah, there was a study that they did with MyFitnessPal users with people with diagnosed eating disorders, and I think it was 73% of the people with the diagnosed eating disorder were MyFitnessPal users, and 73% of those said that the use of the app had actually contributed to the eating disorder. So it just seems that, as I said, it sets up your lizard brain with your conscious intelligence, and your lizard brain always wins because you're always set up for survival.
Right. So if MyFitnessPal is watching this, we're not in any way implying causation here. We're only alluding to an association.
Definite correlation.
An association, but not causation. And I suppose this is
a documented study.
Well, okay, Your Honor, it's a documented study.
You'll have to take it up with the journal editors.
All right. So, but I suppose what we're saying is that if you are too obsessive about counting calories, it can lead to neurotic disorders, and in certain individuals, it can actually facilitate. I'm not sure that it would create, but I think it would certainly facilitate eating disorders. So the downside, so basically what you're saying is the downside of counting calories is the mental health aspect. But then there's another downside, because if you suddenly starve yourself, what happens to your basal metabolic rate? What happens to your thermogenesis?
It plummets. If you say I'm going to eat 40% less calories for the next 12 weeks, your metabolism shuts down, you start to lose muscle mass, and your body goes into, I was going to say starvation mode, but it gets to the point where it says, I need to do whatever I can to make sure I get that energy back. So as soon as you allow it to, and as soon as that 12-week challenge or whatever that limit was, or whenever you just say, I give up, you rebound, and all that energy you put back on probably goes on back as fat, because you're eating the energy-dense, nutrient-poor, low-protein, low-satiety foods that will help you gain fat really quickly.
So if I'm listening to what you say, right, this is what I'm hearing, that calorie restriction, which we'll use the synonym starvation. If you go on a starvation diet, it actually reduces your metabolic rate, which means you're not actually losing as many calories as you might if you were on a normal metabolic rate. And then when you stop the diet, you get really hungry, you eat junk food, and then you pile the weight back on. So the starvation diet causes a slower than otherwise possible weight loss, which is then almost entirely, if not entirely, reversed when you cease it. So there's just absolutely no point in doing these starvation diets. Is that what you're saying?
It works for some people, and I suppose if it fits your macros and the bodybuilders who prioritize getting enough protein and dial things down intelligently, but a lot of people fail when they come to calorie counting. And I suppose as an engineer and you're a doctor, that you've got to say that energy is always conserved. There's no people often talk about calorie counting and say it's all garbage and calories aren't real and deny energy balance, and that's definitely not what we're saying. Energy is always conserved in the real world, and the law of thermodynamics is a legitimate thing, but we're just saying it's really complex and beyond your ability with a fitness tracker to do accurately to a point that it will achieve long-term results for most people.
So what you're saying is there are always people for whom anything works, but we're trying to help the majority of people most of the time.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose that the data-driven fasting thing helps people to see their energy balance in a more accurate, live way.
So from our previous discussions, you have often alluded to ancient man and the food that is available in the natural cycle of the years going by. Ancient man went through periods of fasting.
Yep.
Why didn't they turn out into fat couch potatoes?
Wow, they didn't have donuts and Krispy Kremes and peanut butter and cream and everything in the fridge at the end of the day when they got sick of tracking. They didn't have the option, and they had to chase down the woolly mammoth to get food. So it was a bit of extra effort to get that comfort food.
Okay. Yes. I suppose that's an obvious question, having asked it.
It's a circumstantial, environmental, enforced calorie restriction and cycling through, as we talked about, summer, winter, spring, autumn, that actually enforces different types of foods.
Yeah. But all right, so let me just push this to the reduction of the absurd, right? Let me just push this one step further.
Didn't give the right answer.
No, you did. I mean, what you basically said was the question was wrong. So here's the revised question, right? So yes, ancient man didn't have fridges full of ice cream and Dunkin' Donuts around the corner. Definitely. What about modern man who follows the ancient man diet?
Yeah, I'm personally a fan of paleo to a degree.
Right.
Rob Wolf is a bit of a hero of mine, but
right.
You can always. I think the paleo movement sort of collapsed as soon as Amazon was full of paleo comfort food cookbooks where they found you could do bulletproof coffee, which is that's paleo, and mix
What's
the
bulletproof
almond.
Coffee?
It's this magic fat-burning elixir where you put MCT oil and 500 calories worth of butter with your coffee and say my insulin is low and therefore I'm going to be burning fat, and somehow it doesn't work for some reason. And a lot of us went through that phase, and then you get the almond flour, which is energy dense, mixed with the butter or the coconut oil, which is paleo, and then all of a sudden you've got this energy dense carb fat combination which basically mimics junk food. So yes, it's paleo, but it's very processed, and that's where paleo can fall over. But but if you have environmentally, it's really hard to get those energy dense nutrient poor foods all the time. As we talked about last time, I think they're generally only available in autumn in the natural environment. So in spring, they're much harder to come by when all the animals are lean and the sprouts are new and fibrous and not full of starchy carbohydrates. So it enforced that energy restriction and that cyclic nature that was really beneficial for us, that we went through that sort of a keto protein sparing modified fast, high carb cycle, fat gain coming into winter again sort of cycle that was beneficial to an extent.
Yeah. So Other fasting protocols. What are the problems with other fasting protocols? Why is yours different from others? Like
Yeah,
the
I
16, 8 to
suppose.
24. Those are the more commonly known ones,
Yeah,
aren't they?
yeah, or alternate day fasting, or multi-day fasting, or
Yeah,
extended
yeah,
fasting, because then magic can give you autophagy, or fat fasting, which you can
yeah.
just drink the bulletproof coffee and butter and fat bombs and believe that you've got low insulin, therefore those calories don't count. There's all different variations. But I suppose the problem is that none of them are tailored to your unique metabolism, your activity levels.
Hmm.
Are you a bodybuilder who's really active, or a triathlete, or a couch potato, or a 70-year-old type 2 diabetic who does very little activity? All those different people have different calorie needs, protein needs, metabolic needs. And if you just believe that if you don't eat for long enough, you'll get the results you want, regardless of what you eat when you eat again. A lot of those people just keep, they lose weight while they, like we talked about before, they lose weight during the fast and then eat whatever they want after, because what you eat after a fast, you're not very discretionary, because your lizard reptilian brain takes over, and you just go through that cycle that we talked about. A lot of people I knew ended up becoming, fat skeletons. One guy called it that was me. That I did this extended fasting, lost muscle mass, and then ate whatever I want. I know when I tried the fasting craze and didn't eat for days at a time. You come home and the peanut butter, the cream, the whatever's in the fridge, and all of it looks really good, and you sort of congratulate yourself, and then a few months of this goes by and you go, why am I not actually improving my metabolic health, or not losing actual weight? I'm not actually improving here, and figured there has to be a way to move forward.
And what is that way? What is the
The
way that you
way,
propose? What is, yeah, we'll call it the way. Can we call it the way rather than data-driven fasting?
the way
I think it's much
sounds
more
fine.
catchy. Yes.
I'm sure nobody's got that thought of that before. The way, it's
The
very
way.
definitive.
Marty, tell me
Yeah,
about your way as opposed to my
the
way.
data-driven fasting. I suppose coming from my wife Monica's a type 1 diabetic, and tracking blood sugars is always a day-to-day reality, and I don't mind doing it myself occasionally. And looking at the ways of Dr. Bernstein, who's a diabetes type 1 guru, and he really recommends that type 1 diabetics maintain their blood sugar within a certain range, and when that gets low, they eat, and when it gets high, they inject insulin. And that doesn't work with people who don't have type 1 diabetes to the same approach, but it's just sort of all that blood sugar, using blood sugar as a day-to-day tracking of energy status just makes a whole lot of sense to me. And there was some previous work. There was a 2012 book by Angela Ross, The Glucometer, and then some more recent work out of New Zealand, from the University of Otago, building on some other research from Italy, where they looked at people using their glucometer, their day-to-day, minute-by-minute blood glucose levels to calibrate their hunger. And it just seems that people can get a feeling on their true hunger and their true need to eat by looking at the current blood glucose status. So are you actually hungry, or are you eating out of habit or routine, or
Yeah.
because that Krispy Kreme in the fridge was really yummy and you want another one, or is it
Yeah.
breakfast time, or why are you eating right now? And you can actually say, am I hungry? Do I feel hungry? I'll check my blood glucose using a simple little blood glucose meter, and you can calibrate that. And then as you continually drop your blood glucose over time, you decrease your energy status. You achieve a negative energy balance using a measurement that's more practical and useful and measurable than calories over the long term.
So what you're saying then is that blood glucose monitoring, even in someone who's not diabetic, is
Mm.
an essential pathway to data-driven fasting, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
someone with type 2 but diabetes will have really elevated blood sugars in the 7 millimolar or 150 milligrams per deciliter, but optimal is much closer to 80 or 90 milligrams per deciliter. So
So
and
can we use
optimal insulin levels and BMI are
yeah,
much more optimal at those levels.
right.
So
So I'm a man that uses millimoles. I don't use milligrams per deciliter. So let's just hone down on this, right? So
yep.
for me, a normal glucose is kind of above 3.5 to, it's between 3.5 to 5. I mean, you can argue about what's normal, what's disease based, but about 3.5 to 5 would be, what I would anticipate to be normal. What's the normal range for you in terms of your data-driven fasting triggers?
Yeah, waking blood glucose is a measure of an indication of your overall body fat and metabolic health. Someone with type 2 diabetes will have elevated waking BGs, basically because their energy leaches into their bloodstream over time, over the night, and sort of backs up in the system. So when they wake up, their blood glucose is elevated, not from necessarily what they ate, but because of the energy in the system sort of backing back up. But so anything above, 5.6 is definitely going to be problematic, but more 5, maybe more optimal. But then before meals, anything above 5.6 and up down to 4.2 might be more optimal. So progressively, we work to wait a little bit longer until the blood glucose drops a little bit more each time until that before meal blood sugar is a little bit lower, if that makes sense.
So really, it's up to the individual to track their own blood glucose on waking and then pre-meals, and then to determine what their usual level is, and to gradually then knock it down a bit before you eat. So you're delaying food intake progressively, waiting for a lower BGL. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's the critical thing. I mean, there wasn't a clear answer that I gave just before to what's optimal, because it's really what's optimal for you. And you look at your personalized blood glucose trigger and say, what's my current, when do I normally feel hungry? When do I normally eat? Maybe I can wait a little bit longer next time until it comes it down a little bit more. And then progressively, as you focus on the blood sugar reduction, then your body fat and everything else works itself out.
So then you've got to really train yourself to ignore the cues to eat that are not biochemical, and you need to learn how to respond to a different cue, which is effectively a number on a blood glucose monitor. That's quite hard, isn't it? Because we all eat as you've already alluded to. We all eat for different reasons. So it's sociable, it's emotional, it's routine. Smells good. I mean, here's another question I wanted to allude to. This is my personal experience, right? I am a Tim Tam addict. I cannot eat one Tim Tam and then not eat a second, third, or fourth. And after about 10 minutes, I do feel a bit sick and nauseous, and I'm overwhelmed with guilt, and I say, I'm never eating Tim Tams again until, of course, the next time.
And then you can finish the packet.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can finish a packet of Tim Tams without a second thought. It takes a while to actually get that blood glucose elevation, doesn't it? And so what drives us to eat before we get the elevation in blood glucose, and certainly with me and Tim Tams, is the dopamine rush that I experience when I find that intensely sweet taste in my mouth.
Yep.
So again, that's another driver to eat that we've got to actually acknowledge, that you've got to actually say no to these non-biochemical, extraneous, non-appetite cues. Are you really hungry, or are you emotionally eating, or are you addicted to Tim Tams? Yeah,
but you've got to. You say it's not biochemical, but that dopamine response. You're an addiction guru. That addiction response with the dopamine, you get a dopamine hit because your body loves those foods because they fill your fat and carbohydrate stores at the same time without the hassle of having to process all that nasty protein that's really hard work to turn into energy and store as fat. So the reason why you get that dopamine from the Tim Tams is they're really great to prepare for winter. And your body is always in this, I need to prepare for winter and store as much fat as I can mode. So you very quickly realize when you have those Tim Tams, you test a bit later and you go, blood sugar's not coming down because you filled the carb and fat storage tanks in your body at the same time.
Yeah.
And therefore you get a long, slow response of blood glucose that just doesn't come down for hours and hours. And it's really, I think, from that depression, anxiety perspective, it puts you in control of seeing, hey, this is how that food affected my blood glucose. That I ate that food 2 hours ago and my blood glucose is this. So it quickly trains your hunger and appetite to understand this is why those foods have an effect on me. And you learn very quickly through this self-reflection rather than just tracking everything you ate every day on MyFitnessPal and then 2 weeks later going, I'm not losing weight, but I'm spending all this time tracking. Why is that? So it just puts you in this active control position rather than this passive victim mentality that a lot of people end up with the calorie tracking.
So if I could summarize, we've talked a lot about how metabolism and the energy that we expend is variable, and everyone is different. And we've talked about how various dieting protocols don't really work because they don't take into account individual variation and they don't understand human frailty. Whereas your system depends on blood glucose monitoring and is basically tailored to individuals, and the system involves retraining your emotions, your psychology, to actually start consuming food when your blood glucose is at a predetermined level.
Yep.
And that is your way, and it is your way that actually achieves results, which we can see on your website, yeah?
Yeah. And we've trialed it with, sent out 400 spreadsheets now, and people are loving it. It's blowing up, which is insane. So
it's great.
Really amazing and encouraging. So,
well, Marty, as always, thank you so much for your time and expertise. I really do hope that you can join us again soon, and I look forward to chatting with you again.
That'll be great. Thanks, Fergal.
That's it for today's show. Thank you for watching. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong. Goodbye.